Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about SETHOS. Now looking at him in the character archive, normally we're going to be going through the character archive normally, but because he is going to be on the banner, just like we did with Nahida and Hu Tao, and obviously we did Kuki and Xing Cho, now we're going to be talking about the last 4-star on the banner, which is SETHOS. Now the idea with SETHOS is very interesting because him as a character is a little bit weird. With him as a character, you really have to think about playing him as an Aggravate DPS. He's like Cyno in the sense that yes, he can work on Hyperbloom as well, but Cyno almost prefers Hyperbloom. And I was able to talk to a friend about this who really uses SETHOS a lot as well. And the idea with SETHOS is that really you can once again run Hyperbloom. It is difficult to hit the cores with the infusion that you get from the bow, so that can be a little bit of an annoyance. It can be done, but it's just a little bit more difficult and time consuming and a little annoying. Whereas, you know, Cyno just kind of hits in a very broad area and in a big AoE type hit, so it's a lot easier to hit those cores, as well as he's kind of built for it and towards it. SETHOS, once again, is built more for and towards Aggravate, but if need be, he can work on a Hyperbloom team. But both of those, he is going to be the main damage dealer and the forward, most likely on-field DPS for the team. So when looking at his team setups and whatever, we'll look at that later, that's kind of the idea we want to look at. But let's go ahead and talk about his talent priority first and foremost when we look at this. As you can see here, the first priority is you're going to be looking at is the normal attack talent. After that is the burst, because this is where you're going to be getting your infusion. At this point in time, as well as you're going to be dealing that extra infusion, you're going to get some extra damage based off your elemental mastery as well. So getting these things, obviously this initial damage that you're getting is based off attack and elemental mastery, and his burst is also giving the dusk bolts that you're dealing are also based off of elemental mastery. So the damage you're going to be getting through everything based off elemental mastery, so you're going to see a lot of EM on the character, but because a lot of his damage can also be given through attack and EM as a combo, you're going to see a lot of the times him going into both, which is why he works for Aggravate pretty well. And he can once again work for Hyperbloom, but because of the way he's built, it does kind of force or lean towards him being more of an Aggravate build rather than a Hyperbloom build. So really, the normal attack is the highest, honestly probably paired on the same level as the burst in terms of leveling priority, and then the skill is at the end. Skill is nice and all, but at the end of the day, when it really comes down to it, the skill or the normal attack and the burst are going to be probably at the same level and a very high level at that. So let's go ahead and talk about his normal attacks. Now, normally with other characters and their normal attacks, there's nothing really different. It's usually just normal attack, charge attack, plunging attack. But because he's a bow character, he's got to have something very special. So when we look at his charge attack, he's going to take the power of Electro into his arrowhead, do damage with it. His first charge level he's going to have is going to fire off an arrow carrying the power of lightning that deals electro damage. Pretty basic, just a regular electro hit. And as you can see here, with the aim shot charge level 1, you're going to do 155% damage. Electro damage specifically. The charge level 2 states that it fires off a shadow piercing shot, which can pierce enemies, dealing electro damage to enemies along its path. Meaning if there are multiple enemies in a row, SETHOS will be able to hit all of them in a row, basically because it's piercing through multiple. After the shadow piercing shot is fully charged, SETHOS cannot move around. So as soon as this happens, I'll show you this. The first level you're going to see here, he can move around freely, but as soon as this last one immediately goes, I'm holding the W key and I can't move at all. I hope you can hear the clicking as well, until he takes that shot off and away. So that is something to keep in mind as you are running with SETHOS as a character. Once again, can't really move beyond that certain point, so especially with bow characters, that is a little bit annoying. And although you do want to get to that point, getting to the shadow piercing shot is very, very good, because as you see here, this is 155% at charge level 1 for attack, and this at level, or at the second charge level, is going to be 175% attack, so it's 20% more, and it's 168% elemental mastery on top of that damage from the 175% attack as well. So you're getting a lot more damage based on what you can do here. It's definitely worth it to go further into the shadow piercing shot, so keep that in mind as you are running with SETHOS and you're actually going to be using him. Now let's talk about the burst. The burst states that it performs a secret rite, very similar to the kind of ideas and the wording that we see in Cyno's kit actually, and you will enter the Twilight Meditation state, during which SETHOS normal attacks will be converted into enemy piercing dusk bolts. So now when you use your burst, you're now going to be doing normal attacks. You'll deal electro damage to opponents in its path, and with the damage increased based on SETHOS' elemental mastery, which is what we see here in the skill attributes, and also the thing we were talking about earlier, getting that extra damage increase. Initially, these damage bolts seem like they're initially going to be based off of the regular damage, so the normal attack, but when you have the elemental mastery given, this is where that extra damage on top of the dusk bolts is going to be given. So although you don't see Dusk Bolts here, you do see that you're going to be doing normal attacks with a bigger increase of damage. The damage isn't going to be 196.2% of Elemental Mastery for these hits. This is an increase on top of the normal damage that you'll be doing. SETHOS cannot perform aim shot while he's in the Twilight Meditation state. Also keep in mind, this goes on for a duration of 8 seconds, and it's a cooldown of 15, which, although it has a low energy cost, is a little annoying, especially because he's an electro character. Getting that cooldown down is going to be very, very kind of almost desirable for most of his gameplay. The damage dealt by the Dusk Bolts is considered charge attack damage, so as you see here, you're going to see the charge attack damage slots is what we're really looking at when we look at SETHOS to initially get that damage hit on top of the extra buff he gets, and this effect will be cancelled when SETHOS leaves the field. Also, considering its charge attack damage, anything that is normal, or basically anything that is charge attack damage increasing, so 2-piece Marechaussee, one of Shenhe's passive talents with her skill, stuff that's going to increase charge attack damage is going to give him a buff for these damage hits, even though they are normal attacks. Even though when you pop your burst and then immediately go into the normal attacks, you're then actually going to be having something completely different happen. So keep that in mind as you are kind of running with him as a character, and you're going to be running this. You're going to be using your normal attacks a lot, which is good, but the buffs that come with it are going to be focused on charge attacks. Looking at the skill, it states that it gathers the Might of Thunder, dealing AoE electro damage and quickly retreating. If this attack triggers electrocharged, superconduct, basically any type of electro reaction, SETHOS recovers a certain amount of elemental energy. So instead, normally when you have an energy regeneration, or if you hit an enemy with a skill or something like that, you have the chance of creating particles. Well, on top of this, if you can create a reaction, you're going to be giving even more energy back to yourself, which once again, although he has a low energy cost, this allows SETHOS to get his burst back very easily and consistently. So keeping that in mind, it's very, very nice to have. It's very, very good to have as well, considering he's an electro character. It makes sense that a part of his kit is probably going to have some sort of way to give him back his burst back a little bit easier. Now looking at the first passive talent, it states that when aiming, the charging time is decreased by 0.285 seconds, very specific, based on each point of SETHOS' current elemental energy. The charging time can be reduced to a minimum of 0.3 seconds through this method, and a maximum of 20 energy can be tallied. If a shadow piercing shot is fired, consume the tallied amount of elemental energy, and if it is a charge level 1 shot, then consume 50% of the tallied elemental energy that you have. So, as you can see with this, you're going to be doing your charge attacks, right? Or you're going to be doing this shadow piercing shot, which is that second charge level where you can't move. It'll consume a certain amount of the elemental energy that you have in your burst, basically. And at that point in time, if you do a charge level 1 shot, it'll consume half of the amount that a second charge level would do. The entire idea here is that with the burst, yes, it's very nice getting those normal attacks off consistently, but you're always focusing on doing charge attacks if you're noticing with him as a character. So as soon as you get here and you have your skill running, as soon as you do this, it would then immediately trigger the first passive talent for you, and that charging time will be taken away a little bit to once again help a little bit more. Although it does take up a little bit of energy, that's kind of the whole point with him as a character, is using your skills to then do those charge attacks and the normal attacks. And then when you have the burst, is to use the burst and just kind of spam normal attacks while you can to get the damage out. But the major thing that you're focusing on mainly with him, like I said before, is doing those charge attacks and the shadow piercing shots. So when you have that charge time that's going to come down by actually taking up and using up energy, you're going to be using your skill first, most likely, to then get energy, and then using your charge attacks for your shadow piercing shots to then use up that energy that you just gained. Now let's talk about the second passive talent that he has. SETHOS gains the Scorching Sand Shade effect, increasing the damage dealt by shadow piercing shots by 700% of SETHOS' elemental mastery. So you're seeing a very big damage increase based off of EM. The Scorching Sandshade effect will be cancelled when any of the following conditions are met. 5 seconds after a Shadow Piercing shot first hits an opponent, and after 4 Shadow Piercing shots strike opponents. So if you can basically have your skill come back a lot and get to the point where you can immediately do charge attacks consistently 4 times in a row, then this effect is going to go away. Or if it just takes you too long and you just have, too much of time basically pass, basically that 5 seconds, then this, extra little Scorching Sandshade effect of increasing your damage by a lot is going to go away. Now, when a Shadow Piercing shot affected by Scorching Sandshade first hits an opponent, Sethos will regain Scorching Sandshade after 15 seconds. So this happens for 5 seconds and then has a downtime of 10 seconds. So although it is very nice, the issue can come up when you initially do this, that it can be a little bit annoying to have a 10-second cooldown until you can get this buff back again. So now that we've looked at him as a character and looked at how he's going to work as a character, let's look at his weapons. Now, there's a lot of different weapons that he can use, and honestly, with Sethos, just because he wants EM, and there are plenty of other characters that like EM, he loves the attack as well, and obviously going into some crit, especially being built on that Aggravate type build, there's going to be plenty of different weapons that he really can use when we look at him as a character. Also, because he ascends into Elemental Mastery, that is kind of the best way to go about him. Now, one of the weapons that can be used, and a pretty good weapon at that, is going to be Hunter's Path. Hunter's Path gives an elemental damage bonus, and then also has like an extra little idea with the ability stating that after you do a charge attack, you'll get the Tireless Hunt effect. After this point, charge attack damage is increased by 160% of Elemental Mastery. That can happen up to 12 of those charge attacks, or up to 10 seconds. It's very good considering 5-star weapons, so you have 44.1% crit rate at level 90. Obviously 542 base attack, so it does take a little bit away from the base attack, but it is nice to get a little bit more base attack than your normal 4-star weapons. Now, also, there are other weapons and plenty of other weapons. As you can see, I'm running already a different one right now, but overall, there are plenty of different weapons, I guess, that can be run and maybe should be run as well. Overall, I think that most weapons are going to do well. I do like another Battle Pass weapon, actually, when we're looking at 4 stars really quickly. Scion of the Blazing Sun is probably one of the more fan-favorite weapons as well, just because you get some extra damage off of the charge attacks. Opponents affected by the Heat Seeker take 28% more charge attack damage. So when you do a charge attack and you hit an opponent, Sunfire Arrow is going to come along and hit an opponent. After it does that, it'll put the Heart Seer effect on them, then it's going to allow you to do more damage to them. So your initial damage hit may not be extremely good, but just like the passive that he has, as soon as the second passive talent, as soon as you hit an enemy with this buff here, then you're going to be having, that buff for 5 seconds or whatever. So having those extra buffs, especially paired with this 4-star weapon, although it is a Battle Pass weapon, it is very good. Now, obviously, you could run the other crit rate weapon as well from the Battle Pass, which is Viridescent Hunt. Not going to be as good in my personal opinion, although it does have a good amount of crit rate and base attack. You're just really looking for stat sticks there. There are plenty of other 5-star bows that can just be used as stat sticks. Also, Amos's bow has the attack percent in the main stat. The ability increases the charge attack damage that you will do, which is going to be most of what you're doing. You're never really going to be doing normal attacks. Now, once again, although you are in your burst doing normal attacks, you're basically doing normal attacks and you can't do a charge attack animation, it still is counted as charge attacks. And then after a normal or charge attack is fired, damage dealt increases by further 8% for every second, basically 0.1 second that it's in the air, up to 5 times. So every half a second that's in the air, it can buff itself up every single time and get a pretty good damage increase based off of this. So I do think that overall the buff from Amos's bow can be pretty good, especially for a character like Sethos. Now, I like the high base attack on a different character, so when I was kind of thinking about building my Sethos, this was kind of my idea. The First Great Magic is another pretty good weapon. Damage dealt increases by these charge attacks by 16% at R1. At level 90, you're going to get 66.2% crit damage, which is a pretty good stat to have. I'm going to be running him mainly in an Aggravate team, so once again, crit actually matters, but if he's on the Hyperbloom team, we'll talk about some EM weapons that you can use in a second. Also with this weapon, states that for every party member with the same elemental type as the wielder, you'll gain a gimmick stack. For every party member with a different elemental type, you'll get a theatric stack. Gimmick stacks are going to give you attack, theatric stacks are going to give you movement speed. Now, usually he's going to be the only electro character in the team, which means sadly he's just going to get a bunch of stacks of theatrics, which is not going to be really that great because it's movement speed. But I guess necessarily it could be helpful a little bit in terms of dodging and whatnot. But honestly, that's just a lot of copium. Mainly I'm using this because of the 16% increase to damage for charge attacks, as well as the crit main stat and higher base attack I can get from the weapon itself. So there's plenty of different options, especially when we're looking at 4 stars, even things like Rust and whatnot. Although it is normal attack damage increase, you're caring about the attack percent main stat here. Moan's Moon also could be helpful as well. Once again, mainly caring about the main stats that you can get. I wouldn't really worry about any ER weapons. That's really not going to be your best bet. Ibis Piercer is also another pretty good weapon that I know works on him, probably second to Scion of the Blazing Sun, because Iron Piercer is attack percent main stat, and then the character's elemental mastery will also be increased after you hit opponents with charge attacks, and that can stack up to 2 times. So you're giving yourself more EM, which he goes off of, the attack percent and the main stat. Good 4-star weapon. I would say one of his best, especially in looking in terms of the 4 stars that you can use for him. Ibis Piercer or Scion of the Blazing Sun are going to be your best bets. Once again, free-to-play option is probably going to be Ibis Piercer, and Scion of the Blazing Sun is honestly probably on par, maybe even less than Ibis Piercer, depending on what refinement you can get from Scion of the Blazing Sun if you have the Battle Pass. So also, I do want to talk about another weapon though, and this is really going into the EM side of things. There are a few different EM weapons that you can run when you're looking for a different type of build with him as a character with SETHOS. The EM weapons are going to be good. You can use these on Aggravate builds, but personally I think these EM weapons are probably going to be better on the Hyperbloom builds, because going so much into EM is going to be helpful more for the Hyperbloom route than it is going to be for the other route, which is your Aggravate. Now once again, going heavy into EM on him is also going to be strong for Aggravate as well. I just figure if you're going to be using a non-crit or non-attack weapon, you're probably going to be running the other set, and you're probably going to be running a Hyperbloom team rather than an Aggravate team. But once again, these weapons can work for multiple different versions. Cloud Forged, after the elemental energy is decreased, a really, really good weapon for him. You're going to increase your elemental mastery, because remember that when you do the charge attacks, the special charge attacks, you're decreasing your energy, which is then increasing elemental mastery, which is increasing his damage, and then you get the elemental mastery right here from the weapon, which is also increasing his damage. So there's a lot of things, in which is why honestly between Ibis Piercer and Cloud Forge, these 2 weapons are probably going to be fighting for first place for him, depending on how you use him. I still do like Ibis Piercer more because the 160 elemental mastery plus the attack percent main stat, whereas Cloud Forge is just giving you a bunch of EM on top of even more EM, which once again, if you're lacking in that, if you're running like an attack percent sans, then Cloud Forged might be better, even if we're talking about the Aggravate team. Now, things like Windbloom Ode or something like the Stringless are probably only really going to be here for the main stats, although the ability on Windbloom Ode does allow you to increase some attack for 6 seconds. Although it is a very short window after you use your skill, you will be switching once again back to immediately using your charge attacks. It might just take some extra time, which is why I'm saying it, which is why I don't think that Windbloom Mode is necessarily amazing, but it is going to be in the lineup as weapons that you can use for SETHOS. Overall, if I had to put these really in a lineup of like which ones I like the most, I think Ibis Piercer's at the top with Cloud Forged right behind it. Behind that, I like Scion of the Blazing Sun, probably Windbloom Ode, and then some of the other weapons, even something like Viridescent Hunt, and then Stringless, and maybe some of the other attack percent options are at the very bottom, as well as Moan's Moon can even be at the bottom as well. So overall, those are a few of the 4-star weapons. In terms of 5 stars, I think, once again, Tighnari's weapon is going to be the best. Behind that is probably going to be, I would personally like to use the First Great Magic, just because the charge attack and the crit that I get from it. Amos's bow is pretty good for the charge attack increase and the high amount of attack, but I do think that it is worth a little bit less, especially when we have something like First Great Magic to use. Now let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. Now I'm going to run through the rest of this build very, very quickly, because there's a very certain way that you're going to be running him really with his sands and whatnot, or his sets, his specific sets that you're going to really run with him. So 4-piece Wanderer's Troop, As you can see, very, very highly used. It's going to be used the most for him, increasing elemental mastery and increasing charge attack damage. I'm just going to say this right now, you should be using this set. Also, yes, 4-piece Gilded Dreams, if you have the ability to use it, sure, it can work. My personal opinion, the extra EM and attack and blah, 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 it's not worth it. I think Wanderer's Troop is just going to be the better set 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10. As you are running and getting ready for a 4-piece of one of these two, though, you can run a 2-piece of Wanderer's Troop and a 2-piece of Gilded Dreams. As you're getting ready, even a 2-piece attack percent set to just make sure you're getting some extra damage from him. The main stats when we look at these, obviously, most people are going to be using EM, makes sense. If you are running the Aggravate team and you are running an EM weapon, I might try to persuade you to run an attack percent sans, which is what I'm going to believe these people are doing, just because, once again, as I talked about earlier, you want to try to have a good balance between those two, attack and EM. The thing with having a lot of EM on the account is nice and all, but the initial stat and attack can get thrown away a little bit. But I do think even if you have an EM weapon, an EM sans won't really hurt you. It'll still help you. I'm just kind of along the idea of, not stacking too much into one thing, especially on one character like this who likes to go into more than one thing, crit, attack, and EM as well. When we look at goblets, it should just be electro damage bonus. If you don't have anything else, yes, EM and attack percent work, but not nearly as close to what electro damage bonus is going to do for you in the long run. Once again, go along that idea of going too heavily into attack or EM can actually be a little bit less, beneficial for you, especially EM when we're looking at these types of things. If you are running a build that is all about Hyperbloom, all 3 of these affixes should be Elemental Mastery. If you are running Aggravate, it should be EM, Electro Damage bonus, and then you should be looking at a crit damage or crit rate option, as you can see here. Most people are going to be running the Aggravate build on him, as you can see already. If you are running the triple EM, you really will only be running him on a Hyperbloom team, most likely. Substats you should be looking for is double crit, EM, and attack percent. That's kind of it. You don't care about ER. You don't really care about, obviously, any of the flats. That's kind of it. Basically, normal DPS type idea, especially as a reaction character with Dendro. Just basically attack plus the double crit, and then throw in the EM for good measure as well if you can find it. Now let's go ahead and look at Constellations. His first Constellation increases the crit rate of the Shadow Piercing Shot by 15%. Another reason why a crit damage weapon like First Great Magic, if you happen to have one lying around, or if you're like me and you sadly got 2 of them before you got Arlecchino's weapon, then you might have, an extra First Great Magic lying around, which it brings a lot of great usability for your crit ratio for the C1 if you have it. Looking at the C2, it states that when any of the following conditions are met, Sethos gains a 15% elemental damage bonus for 10 seconds. They may stack twice, getting a 30% elemental damage bonus, and they are counted independently, which means if something starts at 10 seconds and you get another one 3 seconds later, the third one doesn't have 7 seconds left. The next stack that you just grabbed, the second stack, has 10 seconds. Consuming elemental energy through aim shots, which he already does, you must first unlock this condition as well. You will consume the elemental energy through the aim shots. You have to get through this other, you can unlock this, passive talent to trigger this condition as well. But regaining elemental energy by triggering elemental reactions using the Ancient Rite Thundering Sands, which if we look should be his skill, which we already know he does, gives him elemental energy. If we look at the Constellation back though, again it says regaining elemental energy by using any of this to get some energy back. If you use the charge attacks from the passive or from the charge attack from the Shadow Piercing Shots and you from the passive basically trigger it, then you'll also get one of the stacks for the electro damage bonus. And then also using Secret Rite, his burst, basically the Twilight Shadow Piercer, will also give you a stack as well. You can only have 2 stacks of these, so the best way to really go about this is using your skill, create it, put Dendro on an enemy from another character, switch to Sethos, use your skill, create a Quicken or Aggravate or whatever, and then immediately have one of these stacks, immediately do a charge attack, and that will next give you a great ability to have basically your damage hits are now at a 30% electro damage bonus buff. So very nice to see that we get there. The C3 increases the level of the normal attack by 3, and the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. No increases to the skill, because obviously you only really care to do that to get a lot of energy back. Now looking at the C4, it states that when a Shadow Piercing Shot or a Dusk Bolt, Shadow Piercing Shots are the second charge level of your normal attacks, and the Dusk Bolts are going to be the normal attacks that you do in your burst. But technically they're both going to be classified as charge attacks. But when one or the other strikes 2 or more opponents, because remember, those are piercing through multiple enemies, so if you can line it up and kind of hit multiple in one hit, all nearby party members gain 80 elemental mastery for 10 seconds. That's going to be very nice, especially for Dendro teams, which Sethos is already going to be a part of. A lot of off-field characters, aka Nahida, will love that because it'll give them the ability to do more damage. Looking at the C6, it states that after Shadow Piercing Shot strikes an opponent, the elemental energy consumed by the passive talent will be returned. So this effect can also be triggered up to once every 15 seconds, and you must unlock that first passive anyways. So as soon as you hit an opponent, when we look at this first passive, right, you use up some elemental energy. You use up a maximum of 20 energy at this point in time and consume the tallied amount that you get. If you hit an enemy with the Shadow Piercing Shot though, it'll give that energy right back. Very, 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 very good, because the whole point of this, now this only happens once every 15 seconds, so you're only really getting it one time. It's not consistent, but that does mean that you can probably get out one more of these charge attacks based on using your skill, which is also why, although the skill cooldown is a little high for him as a character, this could be fixed by some other characters by trying to decrease the cooldowns, but that gets into 5-star constellations and whatnot. But still, having this ability to have an extra charge attack go out there because of this C6 is going to be very, very good for your, specifically your Sethos, to get a little bit more damage out, because you're allowing him to do more of those charge attacks that he can do, because he has more energy to his name, basically. So although you're basically using it for free, and then you're using it up and then getting it back, so it's basically for free for an extra charge attack that you do in the initial hit. Now let's go ahead and talk about some Sethos teams. Once again, very quick here, I'm going to be about this. You should be having most likely 2 other Dendro slots in this team. The Dendro Resonance is going to be extremely helpful for you, increasing elemental mastery, and then when you create any type of quicken reaction, you're going to get some extra elemental mastery as well. And then if you trigger Aggravate, which he'll probably be doing as well, you're going to get another 20 on top of it. So from having 2 Dendro characters in here, you can increase Sethos elemental mastery by 100, as well as those characters as well. So having characters like Nahida, Baiju, Yao Yao, just off-field, Dendro Traveler, Kale, just off-field characters that are doing Dendro damage, it's going to help Sethos a lot. Because he is going to be running an Aggravate team, technically you could run another Electro character. Personally, though, I would heavily advise against it. And the reason I would advise against it is because you want Sethos to be the one creating the reactions over and over again. By throwing another Electro character in there, it can sometimes get in the way of, just him being him. But also, I think the major thing that I would find an issue with is that overall with him, I would rather just throw a character that's going to help him a little bit more. Characters like Kazuha who have Viridescent on them. Once again, you can switch that out for characters like Jean, especially if your other Dendro characters don't heal. Throwing a character like Jean in there is going to be extremely good. Throwing a character like her in there, even technically someone like Lynette or Farzan who have, 4-piece Viridescent on them to decrease the resistance or get some resistance shred for Electro on Sethos is going to help him do more damage, because the hits he's going to be doing, although they are Aggravate and are happening with Dendro, they are still purple numbers, which means therefore they are doing Dendro, or they're going to be doing Electro damage, which means that swirling and that resistance shred from Electro is going to be helpful and beneficial for him. Also, characters like Kazuha, like I was talking about earlier, are going to be extremely helpful for that anyways, because he's going to be giving an elemental damage bonus. Other characters, and there's specifically 2 I want to talk about, or even other characters that are running the 4-piece of Scrollless Intercity Hero, if they are a non-Natlan character, can give a 12% elemental damage bonus to the character they create a reaction with. So any character that can create a reaction with Electro will then immediately help do more damage for it, because they're giving an elemental damage bonus. But in my personal opinion, most of the time that you're really going to be running that, characters like Kachina, or most importantly, a better character like Shilonen is going to be better for him. Shilonen's the 4-piece will allow her to give an extra, and Kachina will allow them, because they are in the Night Soul state, when they are doing their reactions with Electro here, they will actually be able to give 40% elemental damage bonus rather than 12% like other characters can do that are not in Night Soul. Once again, Shilone and Kachina going to be pretty good buffers as well for that front, just because of the 4-piece. Shilonen's going to be even better because of the resistance shred that she can get in her own specific team as well. And even with this team, she's even increasing her own personal damage because the other characters are Dendro. So she's increasing her damage. She's increasing Sethos damage. So I do think that overall, that's going to be a pretty solid team. It really is just 2 Dendro characters and a extra character. So if you have Nahida and let's say Dendro main character, I would probably look for a healer or a shielder in this slot. Once again, just because we didn't talk about shielders doesn't mean they're not necessarily going to be extremely helpful. Characters that provide shields, aka Kirara and our Dendro, are going to be extremely helpful for you. Even characters that are not Dendro, but they do create shields, are going to be very, very strong for SETHOS, because once again, you're going to be in your charge attack state, which means you are going to be very vulnerable while you're doing charge attacks to get knocked out of it. You don't have an interruption to resistance, so getting characters that have shields on them is going to be very nice. Or you could throw someone like Dia in there and put her field down. That really messes with like overload and, you know, some really in burning and allowing SETHOS to do some weird. It just kind of gets a little annoying. Although she does allow and give interruption to resistance. Wouldn't be my first choice, but it can work. Another character like that is Toma. He could kind of get in the way of reactions though, which is why a character like, you know, Noelle or a character like Kirara or a character like Zhongli are going to be extremely good for this team. Also someone like Layla, they're not going to get in the way most of the time for the reactions that you're doing with Dendro between his hits as well as the Dendro, because Cryo and Geo will not react with Dendro at all, so that allows a little bit more of a kind of fair play for those characters. So Layla, Noelle, and Zhongli are going to have a little bit more of a buff, as well as Kirara. She's a Dendro character, so that can allow one slot to be filled up, as well as make sure to protect him, kind of get a 2-in-1 from her. Overall, throwing a shielder in there would be smart. If not, throwing in a healer is another great idea. Although you are decreasing his charge time, so being in a charge state won't really be that difficult most of the time. It can just be annoying if you just happen to get hit while you are in your charge state for that short amount of time anyways. But without that being said, that's really kind of it for the Aggravate teams. Now looking at the Hyperbloom teams, very quick and easy. It's just like throwing him in there instead of Sino, right? It's the same idea, except he is a charge character, so throwing in, you know, a Hydro character and 2 Dendro characters is probably going to be your best bet. Characters like Farina, characters that do off-field application that are not based on normal attacks, so you can't use Yelan and Xingqiu. You can, but it's probably not a great idea to do that consistently, unless of course you are using the infusion that you get from the burst, which then that could proc the ability to do so. There's a lot of different things that can happen when you are running these different characters. Technically, once again, Yelan and Xingqiu will be good for that, but when you do the normal attack charge attack version, it won't work. Only in the burst will Yelan and Xingqiu be helpful, which is why characters like Farina is probably going to be your best bet. The damage buff that she can give, as well as the application from the Hydro. Never mind other characters that might be helpful for that, or like Kokomi or something like that, just some off-field Hydro application that you can use a little bit to help him Hyperbloom. Also, having the Dendro characters to then create the bloom, and then him focusing on trying to somehow hit those little cores. Once again, I do say that I don't necessarily think that Xingqiu and Yelan are going to be that great though, because you're really going to be using the charged attack to really try to focus your attack right on the bloom core. So you're not really going to be using those normal attacks, because it's going to be pretty difficult to actually proc the Hyperbloom when you are using the normal attacks that are still charged attacks in the burst. So I would say once again overall that off-field Electro that's not based, or off-field Hydro that's not based on normal attacks is going to be a better bet for you in the long run. Well, that's everything I've got talking about SETHOS. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Also, when looking at SETHOS, let me know if you guys have any other ideas with him as a character. I felt like it was pretty straightforward with him as a character. It's Aggravate or Hyperbloom, and Hyperbloom is really not that great. It does really feel like at the end of the day, most of the time, you're going to be running the Aggravate builds. But let me know if you guys have any other quick tips, any ideas. If you guys are looking to build your SETHOS a little bit further, if this was helpful at all, please do let me know. Also, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.